Right, greetings, hello, welcome. So welcome back to the Philosophy Club here in the centre of France. Today is the 28th of January, so it's been quite an action-packed week in the world. We've had the hearing of the International Court of Justice giving its recommendations about the case brought by South Africa about genocide in Gaza by Israel. I thought it was quite a measured judgment. They gave good explanation under law why, according to their information, yes, there is a risk that genocide may be in danger of being committed, and therefore they've asked the Israeli government, which is a signatory to the Genocide Convention, to do certain things, which is to take all means to prevent genocide. Obviously, they're supposed to be doing that anyway, and to ensure that it prevents and indeed punishes all incentivations to commit genocide. So there have been some talks in the Israeli media and even by responsible government officials that look like they're in incentives to commit genocide. So, they've got to do that. They've also got to preserve evidence and records that can be investigated by the UN and by responsible authorities, the International Court of Justice. And they have to ensure that its military does everything it can to ensure the prevention of genocide. One thing that didn't come before the Court of Justice, which I think is a problem, is that apparently the bombardment of Gaza has been undertaken according to an AI-fueled robot system that is now unleashing bombs on targets associated in some loose way with Hamas. And in other words, it's all been operationalized according to artificial intelligence. And this accounts for the massive numbers of casualties. It's a particular form of AI that's been used by the Israeli Defense Forces called the Gospel, which to me is the most cynical thing imaginable. And yet that wasn't mentioned in the International Court of Justice. So, it's not that the question is who's responsible for this mass killing. Is it the people who programmed the AI to do this? Is it the people that installed it? Or is it the little Israeli operative who presses a button? That was never addressed. I hope that in the more intensive deliberations of the court, they go into that and look at the actual operation itself. But the implication of this is the military has to do all it can to prevent genocide. And I would say stop using that AI system called the Gospel. I mean, it's an absolute blasphemy and a horrendous thing to have named it that. In Hebrew, I think it's hasbora, the Hebrew word. And the other thing they have to do is submit a report to the International Court of Justice about their progress in preventing genocide within a month, which is February the 26th. So what's been Israel's reaction? Well, intelligent Israelis, moral, wise, loving, kind, Israelis are horrified at this, that it's got this far, and obviously will seek to comply. But the trouble is that Netanyahu's regime, I don't think, qualifies under any of those adjectives, and their response has been just out attack on the International Court of Justice, making all kinds of extremist claims against it. Very Trumpian in its hate speech, actually, which I think is shocking. But then, you wouldn't expect them to do anything else, would you? I mean, sadly, of course, they should be an intelligent, moral government, but they're playing the hate, revenge, it's our right to go and slaughter these people card. And then not only that, but they've also unleashed a media campaign against UNRWA, the UN Works and Relief Agency, which is helping Gaza and keeping them alive. So that's the body which the UN has tasked with preventing, a mass slaughter of the Palestinians for the last 16 years and more. It's been helping set up camps, run schools, and now the Israeli government has issued a propaganda campaign, which I think was pre-planned. It's obvious it was waiting in the wings, to demolish the credibility of UNRWA, claiming that some of its employees had helped with the attack on October the 7th. I personally find that virtually impossible to believe. I certainly don't believe that UNRWA would ever in a million years have kept quiet about that had it known it was coming or in any way sanctioned it. I think it's an example of fake propaganda and fake news, which is then, but it's released deliberately a day or two after the International Court of Justice ruling in order to discredit the very body that has just released the ruling. Because it's interesting that in the ruling in The Hague, the judge spoke out, quoting UNRWA's leading personnel, which were saying, yeah, this is like the worst thing we've ever seen. So what Israel does immediately attacks UNRWA, which I think is we're living in this strange world of fake news, semi-news, disinformation, and hate crimes, using hate speech, rather than the world I would like, as chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East, of finding truth and healing these conflicts. Interestingly, UNESCO runs an International Day for Education every year. As a teacher and a scholar, I'm an educationist. And that was a couple of days ago as well, on the 27th, I believe. And this year it was about the dangers of social media, misinformation, and crimes of language. Buddha talked about this years ago, and he said that right speech is one of the key components of the spiritual path towards enlightenment, both individually and collectively. We have to do right speech, and a core element of right speech is speaking the truth. And he said, if you don't know something, keep quiet. If you do know something, speak up. If you're not sure, then say, I'm not sure. And of course it goes without saying that you don't swear, you don't shout, you don't speak aggressively and so on. Whereas I just wish that, anyway, UNESCO are right to focus on this year for their World Education Day. But unfortunately, many of these political leaders around the world are not listening. And however, in America, I think good news that Trump was sentenced by a court for hate speech against a woman that he has been convicted of a sexual crime against, which he continues to deny, she continues to affirm. And in a previous trial, it went to verdict of, yes, guilty. Trump was guilty of a sexual assault. But his way, instead of accepting responsibility and saying sorry, is to continually attack. So he has ratcheted up his attacks. So the jury has sentenced him to $88 million compensation against this woman, which it was done to hopefully deter him from further hate speech against that woman or against other victims. But I don't think he's sane enough that it will deter him. I think he is literally slightly unhinged. And so his rantings will probably continue. What I find incredible is that the Republican Party, any single decent member of the Republican Party can think a man like that is a suitable candidate for the president of the USA. And I'm glad that Nikki Haley has immediately said, look, this guy is not fit for office. I hope she wins the nomination and that the Republican Party realises that this man is a criminal, actually. Yes, I'm disappointed that America, US and UK and so on immediately jump onto the anti-UNRWA campaign and say that we're going to, stop the funding for UNRWA because of these allegations by Israel, of which there's been no proof, no evidence. The UN has immediately suspended the few UNRWA employees that may have been involved in some way, and will do an investigation. But meanwhile, you can't punish the entire UNRWA operation, which is responsible for feeding 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. But these are the sorts of, when I spoke last week, I spoke about the lack of peace-building mechanisms in the International Court of Justice and in the international legal system itself. And I think that what's needed is these people need to talk to each other as human beings, to find the lost friendship that's broken down between them. When the first generation of Zionists went to Palestine, people like Martin Buber and others, they wanted to be friends with Palestinians. They never thought they'd end up doing mass bombings and killings. As I said last week, one of the greatest rabbis of Israel, Rabbi Hirsch, pointed out that Israel received the revelations in the desert, not in the Promised Land, because it was a sign that Israel is not to be associated exclusively with a particular land and not fall into the trap of ego identification with a particular patch of land. I would say, if I was Jewish, I would say, if these kind of crimes of genocide continue, if mad rulers like Netanyahu get into power, then it'd be better to go back into the desert and reconnect in a proper spirit with the divine source of revelation, rather than sell your soul for this state called Israel. Israel's not a state. It is legally, but to me it's far more important than just another state. It was a spiritual project, of many, many prophets and saints and sages over the millennia, named after a particular shamanic wisdom worker, also known as Jacob, before he was given the name Israel, meaning he who struggles or wrestles with or for God. It should be for God. So anyway, that's my little introduction about the state of the world, and let's move on to look at what we can do, as wisdom workers. Philosophers are supposed to be workers of wisdom. How can we draw on wisdom to heal these conflicts? Not just that, but the Ukraine-Russia one, and other conflicts that are going on in the world, which there are far too many. We ought to be able to share this planet in peace and harmony using art, music, poetry, drawing on the finer cultural achievements we've achieved as a humanity. As a poet myself, I believe poetry is the antidote to violence and ugliness. I would have a poet in residence appointed to every parliament in the world, and whose job is to write satires when people are misbehaving. I think the courts of the old kings used to have a fool or a jester attached. I think maybe we should have poets in residence again, who can speak truth to power. So anyway, let's move on. Let's look at the gods from the standpoint of the divine, and look at the tarot of the gods. We'll choose two of them and see what light, if any, what their collective intelligence can shed on our human dilemmas at the moment. We'll choose one we haven't had before. Yeah. Thank you, that's one. Excellent.
Hey.
Oh, right, that's quite
There we
interesting. Well chosen, right. Okay. So we have two quite relevant cards to this Middle East crisis. We have Elohim, which is one of the major arcana, as they're called, and is the 10th of the major arcana, number 10. And this is called, in the normal tarot sets, the Wheel of Fortune. And it's shown by a wheel diagram on the tarot card. The Wheel of Fortune, the Elohim. Why the Elohim is the Wheel of Fortune? Because Elohim is a plural word. It means the gods and goddesses. The Elohim are the creator deities that are responsible for life on earth and the planet, the gods. It's interesting that in the Bible, if you study Hebrew and biblical studies, as I've done, the actual text in Genesis says, in the beginning the gods created the heavens and the earth. It's a plural noun, and that's what should be in the Bible in people's translations when they read it. It's the Elohim that do that. Who are they? Well, let's say the collective gods. The word Elohim occurs more than 2,500 times in the Hebrew Bible. And it means gods in a general sense. Exodus 12:12 describes the gods of Egypt is the Elohim of Egypt. It can mean other supernatural beings. In Japanese, we might call them the kami, the kind of spiritual beings that populate nature and direct our destinies. In Shintoism, there's also the phrase Bene Elohim, meaning the sons of gods, sons of the gods, which occurs actually even in Ugaritic, found in Ras Shamra in what is now Syria, and also Phoenician texts. So the Bene Elohim means the sons of the gods. That's us. And Jesus uses that term quite a lot. Maimonides talks about the Elohim, and it comes from the general Semitic word for God, the gods. El is a particular god. Ilu in Akkadian was a particular goddess. El in Ugaritic and Phoenician is a god. Ilat is Arabic for goddess. They all come from the same roots. And the Elohim is the plural. Now, if you want to go into the deep psychoetymology of these words, then study the tarot text here that I produced, and also my book, The Kabbalah Runes, because it comes from, Aleph, R, and El Lamed, which brings with it certain, let's call it acoustic powers. I mean, one could argue that the Elohim manifest in sound, and that the language we speak, in all languages, is an echo of the Elohim's powers, their archetypal powers. Or you could talk in terms of colour and other vibrational spectra, because energy comes there's one energy, as Einstein and all great physicists have pointed out, but it comes in different forms of vibrations and levels and spectra, and the same with sound. If I was just making one continual chanting noise, you couldn't understand what I'm saying, So I have to modulate, vary the speech, so you get the whole spectrum of up and down sounds. That's the Elohim at work. And it's the same in art, in music, and in colour. The great Impressionist painters like Monet, they paint with all the different varieties of colour to create beauty. And that's what the Elohim want. That's why they've created this world. They want to create beauty here. That's why they've created nature with so much fecundity. The beauty of all the different shades of colours in the different flowers and trees and fruits, and the same with all the different animal shapes and patterns. Around here in the middle of France, we have a peacock, we have heron, we have a beaver swimming in the lake, we have all kinds of animals, we have geese, and all these animals are beautiful in their different colours, shapes, patterns. The cats with all their pattern. Now this is the Elohim at work. This is the variety behind existence. This notion that no, there's only one God, forget the Elohim, is actually blasphemous, because that one primal source actually wants to create the diversity and variety and beauty of the fecundity we see around us, which is the work of the Elohim. And, some days are better than others. The wheel of fortune turns. Some days we have a bad luck. We have, tragedies happen, either collectively or individually in our lives. That's the wheel of fortune at work. And then sometimes, having suffered, then it comes back right again. That's the Elohim, which is the gods in charge of our fortunes. What we have to do, and what this card teaches, is that we have to somehow get to the centre of the wheel in consciousness. This is what Buddha taught and all the great masters. If we're in the middle of the wheel as it turns, we're not affected so much by the ups and downs. We have to get to the axle point and just watch as the wheel turns round. And then from that place of equanimity, calmness, nirvana, we can see the Maya, the play and display of Maya as it unravels, and help guide it in a auspicious direction. Because obviously there is too much suffering on the planet right now, particularly in the Middle East. In Gaza, there's a horrendous amount of suffering. And we can't just sort of sit back and say, oh, well, I'm just meditating, I don't care. No, we have to do what's called meditation, which is meditation plus action. And that's a word invented by a colleague in France who teaches meditation, which is a great word. So the Elohim, yes, what a wonderful card to get. And I would call again on all my Israeli friends that I know and respect and love deeply, and many of them very wise Kabbalists. I've spoken publicly several times in Israel, and there's so much potential in that land for peace, for divine intelligence work, for wisdom work. It's not being allowed to come out because this hate, revenge, anger, blackness is swept over, and of course Hamas is hugely responsible for that because of its unleashing, but on the other hand, so much more could have been done to prevent it getting to that point. That degree of hatred could have been helped if Israel, Palestine, Hamas and so on had listened to my call for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East, which I've issued over the last years, or listened to my proposal for an actual practical peace deal when I proposed that the Netanyahu Trump peace plan, flawed though it was, could at least have been turned into something worthwhile. So anyway, there's lots to ponder here with Elohim. It's a deep card. Okay, let's move on to the next one. We've got an also an extraordinary synchronicity. We've got the card of Jesus Christ, who was from the region. His people are suffering. He was, Palestinian and Hebrew. He was educated and taught in Galilee and born apparently in Bethlehem, which is now in Palestine. I've visited there several times, been to the church, which is built over the cave where he was born. Interestingly enough, it was also sacred to Adonis, who was like the archetypal spring god who comes back in the spring. There are many, many mysteries with Christ and his life story and his work, and I've done a commentary on all 6 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Thomas and Mary Magdalene, which you can listen to on my Green University website, in which I've recorded many, many hours of in-depth scholarly study of the meaning of the Gospels. I think there's no doubt about it, but his teaching was about love, friendship, forgiveness, healing. It was about restoring relationships, so we call that restorative justice. It wasn't about condemnation and hatred and violence. He was someone trying to get to the roots of violence and heal the kind of violence that wells up in all of us. We can all get angry. Even he got angry, we know, like a normal human being, because it's part of the human condition. The thing is what you do with it and how you channel it and where you take it. It was Aristotle, a great philosopher, who inspired many later Christian philosophers, and Jewish and Muslim in fact, who said any old fool can get angry. But to get angry at the right time, with the right person, for the right reasons, and with the right effects, that takes wisdom. That's, and I agree with Aristotle on that. We should very rarely do anger, and if you have to do it, then do it, at the right time, for the right purpose, and with the right effects. I think, would Jesus be angry about what's going on in Gaza? I think he would, actually, because it's such a assault on our common humanity. It's denying the universalism that we humans stand for, which I believe Christ taught. He was not a nationalist in a narrow sense of the word. He was an ecumenical, cosmopolitan thinker who we know he spent some time in Egypt, and all the hallmarks are that he was educated partly in the Hellenic Jewish schools of Egypt, to think like Philo, who interpreted the Bible allegorically, who wanted to interpret the metaphysical roots of the Bible, not in a literalist sense. And that's why Christ was teaching about compassion and love and wisdom. Go deeply into the meaning behind the text. Don't just do what the letter says. For the letter killeth, but the Spirit giveth life, as the King James translation puts it. And Christ was someone that wanted to go to the Spirit behind the words. He also was familiar with the books of Enoch. We know that because he and his followers quote from them. And so you need to study the books of Enoch, as I've done. I've also done a commentary on the 3 books of Enoch in my time in Scotland at the Castle of the Muses there. If you can't be bothered to get the books and read them yourself, listen to the commentary. It's all on the Green University. And I think, yes, Jesus, what would his view be on this tragedy? He'd really want the Palestinians, whether Christian, Muslim or Jewish, to reconcile and to share their differences. Yes, but do so in truth, in honor, honesty and honor, sharing their pain and suffering. This is why I called immediately after the tragedy of October 7th, I called for the people that did it to simply come out of hiding and surrender to the International Court of Justice. Mohammed Daif, who was the mastermind of the October 7th attack, should, in my opinion, have had the courage to say, yes, I'm sorry, I did it, and this is why, and then, speak before the International Court, rather than hiding in tunnels and allowing this mass killing and martyrdom of 26,000 people above ground. I don't agree with the way of violence. I don't think Jesus did, and I don't think he would have sanctioned either the initial attack of October 7th or the tragic over-response by Israel. I still think his voice speaks for non-violence, and I still think that's the only path to go down in this tragic conflict. We have to realise as a world community that we have to pursue the paths of non-violence instead of violence. So I can tell you that on February the 13th to the 16th, I'm helping colleagues in India and around the world to organise a conference on non-violence, the International Conference of Peace and Non-Violent Action, which is online. You can register, it's free. I and many others will be giving talks about how can non-violence be like updated since the days of Gandhi and Martin Luther King and indeed Jesus. Because we're living in such a weird world now where AI is doing mass violence in the name of the people that program it. I gave a paper a couple of years ago saying that in this world of cyber conflict, cyber warfare, we have to invent codes of non-violence for the cyber world. And that has to be involving non-lying, truth-speaking is the cause of peace, I think. I believe Christ would have 100% agreed with that. He did, after all, say that the Holy Spirit, which is the most sacred thing in his map of the Elohim, this Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, is like his line manager. Well, that's the spirit of truth, aletheia in Greek. So I think if we apply this card to this tragedy, we apply the powers of truth, courage, and let's call it spiritual or intellectual diplomacy, and let these divisions that have come up between Muslims, Christians and Jews, let them be dissolved within the light of universal truth, universal wisdom. There are, millions of Muslims in the world honour Christ as the Messiah, as divinely born. They accept there was a virgin birth, something miraculous happened around his birth, we don't know what. They don't accept this Greek theological superimposition that he was the Son of God. The Bene Elohim is a concept that the Semitic mind can relate to, but that applies to many people, not just one. Why would God have just one son? It doesn't make sense to their mind. Nature never does things singly. Nature is fecund, and there's always a whole stream of. Look at the number of stars. It's been calculated recently, 600 sextillion stars in the universe. at least, as far as we know, and there's going to be more. So you know, why would, if the Elohim can create a universe this vast, they'd obviously send backup to the Son of God on the job on this particular lonely planet. And that's what Muslims believe Muhammad was. He was the backup to Jesus, coming 600 years later saying, you know, with an additional further revelation in the Quran, which explains the bits, because obviously the Gospels don't explain everything fully. He himself never wrote anything. And you know, even St. Paul, whose writings fill a lot of the New Testament, he never met Jesus, apart from etherically or astrally, and in his conscience. So it's a slightly, you know, second-hand revelation we've got. And Muhammad felt, therefore, it's time to download afresh from the Elohim, which he called Allah. He wasn't, you know, the most theologically sophisticated, trained Neoplatonic thinker, Muhammad, but he was an incredibly profound soul searcher. And the truths that he came up with in the Quran are, you know, I would say 100% in parallel to what Christ was teaching. So listen to my commentary on the Quran as well, and you'll see what I mean. So Jesus is not just for the Christians, he's there for all the Muslims too. He's also there for all the Jews. This is the tragedy. He was the king of the Jews. Discuss, what does that mean? You know, he was descended, it would seem, from the royal family of David. But I think it's more of a cosmic thing. As being the king of the Jews must be a kind of cosmic potentiality. And Kabbalists can explain it as someone who's, I think it's someone that's reconciled Malkut, the kingdom, the lowest Sephiroth, with Keter, which is the highest Sephiroth, which is the crown. And so it's someone who can bring the highest insights from Keter, God's realm, down into the most mundane things we have to face as embodied beings, and create a sort of passageway between the absolute and the particular. I mean, Hegel tried to explain it in his writings, you know, since then we've got Ken Wilber and transpersonal thinkers that have been doing the same. So I think what, you know, what Christ was up to was about healing and reconciling the different worlds, and that is, gosh, so needed now, isn't it? So let's rededicate, I would say, to this healing work, whether we're Jewish, Muslim or Christian. I regard myself as all three and more. You know, I'm also a Druid and a Yogi and a Vajrayana Buddhist and so on and so on, and a Neoplatonist. I mean, there's nothing in the periodic table that says you can only be one thing. So as a representative of the Elohim of Earth, I would say let us all be all of them, and let us celebrate the fecundity of life, which, you know, it's like, would you tell Bach he can compose music, but he's always got to use the note D. He can never make any other notes. I mean, he could do a lot with just D, and he could play with different octaves and stuff and rhythms, but it would be limited, Bach, in D. You know, no, he wants the whole range, and so we humans have the right to have the whole range. So in my understanding as a religious studies teacher, one isn't literate until we've mastered all 168 boxes. Yeah, so let's go to the table next, okay? Because it's a joy really to explore. I hope people enjoy that. So let's have, yes, one each. Sophie, you go first. Just, you can choose one if you like, rather than doing it randomly. Or you